I've begun to realize why I've always had a certain dislike for receiving compliments in general. And it is because usually when I would receive them from, the only other person I knew, only other person who could give them, you know, they were usually surface level, obligatory, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? They were a cover for something else. There was a hidden motive behind them. There was something underneath it or behind it, or it was just completely empty. And that right there is the key point, which was that when I would receive compliments, it was never sincere, it was never actually really a compliment. It was a puzzle to be decoded and to figure out for what reason, if any, was the person saying it or giving the compliment. Was it out of appeasement? Was it out of being condescending or patronizing? Was it out of trying to, get me to do something? Was it just completely obligatory and there was no actual substance behind it? Just saying it to say it. And, that formed kind of a poor relationship between me and getting complimented on various things. I realize that now as I do this job, there are like particular kinds of compliments, though, that do better than others. And I find that usually, like, when someone compliments me, if it's on a more, what's the word? Like actually pointing out the quality of the work, or like, I guess if the compliment has a sort of attentive quality to it, like it actually directly has to do with the quality of the work itself, the act, some aspect of it, then it feels more genuine. One, because it's more attentive, and two, it feels more, I guess one word I could use is adult, mature, structured. I'm not a. I guess it. Part of it is that it eliminates some of the guessing from trying to figure out why they're saying what they're saying, and in a way, to me, it feels more. It feels like I'm being treated more in an adult fashion. Whereas when I'm complimented with things like, you're doing so good, or you're doing very well, my mind immediately jumps to, being looked down on, excuse me, infantilized, you know, being, just the way I've come up, that sort of compliment of just like, you're doing so good, you're doing so well, you know, you're getting the hang, vague sort of like sweet compliments like that. They always, and how should I say this? How should I say this? I'm thinking about it. Like, for example, there is someone at my job who, one of them will be like, "Oh, that looks really good," and they'll point out a quality of it. They'll point out an aspect of it, some part of the they'll show that they've considered it and considered my work on it and things like that. Whereas there is another person who, in a very like, I guess you could say motherly tone, Not that she's much older than me overall, but, she says in that sort of like parenting, like, kind of like when a parent talks to their child. Sorry if I'm coughing. I'm cooking and I'm got Italian seasoning, and that always gets in my throat. But in a like a parent talking to a child sort of way. Like, you're doing so good. You're doing amazing. And every time that happens, I just have to remind myself that, like, well, some people just speak that way. Not necessarily a reason to find offense or get offended in that, but I do recognize that those kinds of compliments and responses really do get me on edge. They don't necessarily get on my nerves, but they get to my nerves to hear those kinds of things. And it's like, and then I start looking for reasons, like, is there any reason for this person to have, like, mentally infantilized me, or to see me as what's the word I'm looking for? I'm not exactly sure, so I'll just explain it. To see me as like something to talk down towards, or something like that. And if I can come to the conclusion, that, like, no, there isn't, then it'll be like, well, maybe it's just the person and the way they talk, something like that. Get over that kind of thing. I can get over that kind of thing pretty quickly. But, I was just thinking about it. Thinking about my response to it, and why it frustrates me. And as I was thinking about it, I do think of, like, other comments the person has made over time about, like, there's like a thing where you have to help each person take their turn. You have to, there's like this document, I guess you could call it, each person's name on it. You go step by step and make sure that each person gets their turn, and it spreads out work and pay evenly. It's a whole thing. And there are two ways of doing it that I have witnessed. And the person at my work, when they started talking to me about the way that they like to do it, and the way that I've been doing it, and things like that, they would say things like, I know that this way, like, I have OCD too, and being able to erase this, and then I know it feels so much more satisfying. And then I was just like, I looked at the person, and I wasn't rude or anything, but I looked at the person and was like, no, I do it this way because this is how I was taught by the previous person who did this. And it always gets on my nerves, pet peeves me, when someone will diagnose behavior that they don't understand or have the context for, or something about that person saying, like, trying to say that I was using the system that I use because of OCD, and then trying to be all relatable, that kind of thing. That kind of thing just ticks me off. It ticks me off immensely, because I don't know, it tells me that this is how the person has been seeing seeing the situation, seeing me or some aspect of my working there the entire time, with some level of that that I am like, or some aspect of my work is like OCD, something like that. And then I really think to myself, like, is that true? And I don't really think it is. I really don't. I do exactly what's in the purview of my job. I do what I can to maintain my sense of quality. I am fine perfectly to leave things be, but I do have, you know, my own baseline for what I think looks good, and I am dedicated to the job. And it irritates me to think that just for having some measure of dedication or, working your job, that if it's more than what someone else does, that they'll look at you and they'll say something like that, like it's OCD or something like that. And it's like, no, I'm doing what it takes for my job to be able to function and for my work to move smoothly. And, it is a job with customers, so to make sure that the place looks presentable, keep people happy, But, I've learned at this point not to mind it too much. I'm just giving my private thoughts here on this journal, I don't say any of this to the person or anything. Or, dislike them for it. Or what have you. It's just, you know, going through it right now, thinking about it. But, saying it again, it irritates me to think that showing any level of dedication to your job, any level that is above what, other people around will do, or, showing any amount of attention to detail, or anything like that. And suddenly it's diagnosed with whatever the other people around come up with, And, I start to think about that, and I'm like, is that a possible reason for someone to talk down to me, infantilize, be patronizing or condescending, whatever the right word is there? Is that a possible excuse me, got hair in my mouth. Cat fur. Is that a possible reason for that to happen? And yeah, I suppose it could be, talking down to someone in a way that's meant to be calming and soothing, that kind of thing. Like, all right, don't get upset, that kind of thing. Trying to talk a person down, thinking that they're gonna explode and that you gotta compliment them so that, like talking to a kid, that kind of thing. And every time, and the thing is, every time I, if it's one of those things where, like, I'm just guessing, and if I try to overcompensate, it affects the quality of my job, and I don't really care about the person's opinion of me, I just keep doing my job, but it still annoys me, regardless. And so, when I perceive anything like that, when I perceive that could be happening, not that it is, I'm not omniscient, can't read minds, but if I feel like that is what could be happening, I just stay calm, and I just say something very calm, like thanks, or, anytime, or I'll go like, especially if I'm having to rush around, take care of things, I'll be like, you got it, or yeah, or, I'll do some vocalization. Usually, if I'm like having to rush around, lost in thought kind of thing, I'll make like an affirming sound. And if not, I'll say like thanks, or, anytime, or you're welcome, or, something like that in a very calm, measured tone. Yeah. I figure that hopefully, if I conduct myself in a very neutral, more mature manner, but, I can't control other people. My coworker may continue, and it may be like completely out of good. Here, see, I shouldn't assign negative motivation to it because I don't know. So how can I expect a person to stop doing that? I don't know the reason why they're doing it in the first place. So the part of me that watches other people's behavior tries to keep myself safe by predicting them or figuring out why they're doing what they're doing, That part. I've got to let it know that, if we act on your observation, then that means losing some quality of the work, which at the end of the day, there are, and here's the part I have to realize, right? Be real with myself. There are more people who make comments on my work that there are more people overall who make compliments or comments on the quality or the style of my work than there are in the way that to me is more comfortable, is more I actually do see it as being more mature. I'm not just using mature to make it sound better. To me, that is like a more mature way to compliment someone. Personally, for me, if I were to compliment someone, I do feel it is a more matured way to compliment someone by pointing out an attentive detail, something about their work, the way that their work affects you, affects them, something that shows engagement. For me, that's a better way to compliment than just saying you're doing very well, or you're doing so good, or something like that. And I gotta realize that I'm getting more of those constructive, I guess you could say constructive compliments that I'm getting of more vague, congratulatory compliments. And it's just that one particular kind sticks out to me more than the others do. Yeah, it's a whole thing. It's a whole thing. And I'm working through that. I don't always want to be, paranoid of other people and their motivations and stuff. Not that I am now. Like, I shouldn't say that I'm like that 100% of the time. But, from my experience, if someone does behaviors that are similar, even just superficially similar, it reminds me of the other person, and it puts me in that sort of fight or flight mode. So, acknowledging that here, acknowledging it, and taking steps to put it more into place. Yeah. But, besides that, yesterday, I finished a piece of music that I started over 2 years ago now. 2 years ago. Not that I've been working on it for 2 years. I started it on a specific date for a length of time, like a month or a week, 2 years ago, and then just stopped working on it, didn't touch it. Other things came up, which I did finish work on, situation. And then another thing is I just ran out of ideas on it, ran out of steam, didn't have the experience I have now, which is why about a few weeks ago, I would say, I started to slowly chip at it and work on it again. Composing it, working on different sections, until finally it was completed yesterday. And its original file name is, I think it's like Forest. And oftentimes, when I want to name a track, I'll just listen to it and just sort of get a general feel for the name based on it. So I chose the name Flowers of God Nearby. It just gave me that kind of feeling. Plus, I had originally named it Forest, so those two reasons kind of came together. I like it when the name of the track evokes an image in the track, if that makes sense. Not so much that the track itself evokes imagery of flowers, but that the name itself will have the person looking for that feeling in the music and finding a new way to see that image in the music. So when I made it, Flowers of God Nearby, it's not necessarily meant to... It's not like Waltz of the Flowers by Tchaikovsky, where he's composing to evoke the feeling of... What was the name? Was it Waltz of the Flowers? It is Waltz of the Flowers, right? Hold on, I'm going to check. Tchaikovsky. Yeah, Waltz of the Flowers. So it's not like a piece like that where it's meant to evoke the feeling of flowers and things like that, but rather trying to see flowers in a new way through the title and finding it in the music. If that makes sense. Which I think it does. But one of, actually two of the inspirations for that piece of music. So the first one is Metroid Prime. I really like the way Metroid Prime mixes its music, how a lot of Metroid Prime's tracks have so many elements that are just kind of buried into the track. Metroid Prime's music is very much not necessarily made to have all the elements nice and clean and hearing it clearly. Like, there are so many elements of Metroid Prime's soundtrack that on repeat listens I'll realize that there's something going on in this ear that I never noticed before, or that ear. And so when I was composing it, I wanted to capture that feeling of just this almost like soundscape, more than trying to be overly musical. Because when you listen to a Prime track, as I said, there's so many buried sound. It's so airy, and things that kind of like overlap with each other. Some things are like kind of, it doesn't have compression, no equalizer, no low pass, no high pass. It's like, it's clangorous. It's clamorous. There's all sorts of noises and sounds, and some of them are just bashing in the background. It's a whole thing. If you ever hear a Metroid Prime track, it's got this whole style to it where things aren't necessarily made to try and be clear in the mix. It's airy, wispy, sometimes indistinct. But I wanted to capture that feeling, along with how Metroid Prime uses a lot of, in order to be sci-fi, Metroid Prime uses a lot of electronic noises and synthetic noises. And one thing I really like is how, like, if you hear Helios's track and Zelios's track, um, one thing that really stands out to me is how, like, Helios, some parts of its track just turn into hip hop with like a boom bap beat in the background, but it's Metroid, and I think it's interesting to have a sci-fi soundtrack almost approximate a genre for a second, but also have here. I'll explain with Zelios as well. With Zelios, you have the doom 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 doom. But really, the only thing that about it, and it's rock. It straight up is like metal, rock, whichever one. But the thing about it is that the only traditional rock instrument that it really has is the guitar. Everything else, bass, vocal, is electronic noises. And I love that idea of elements of a genre. Same with Helios's track. So it has that, but it doesn't have samples. It's not like actually hip hop, but all of a sudden it approximates hip hop. And you have these electronic noises and synthetic sounds sort of mimicking aspects of the genre. So, yeah, in like Zelios's track, you have the, but what's doing that isn't another guitar. It's this, it's this alien voice synth. There's something about the instrument not being the instrument, but instead being this synthetic electronic replacement that's doing something similar. And then you have the choir, like the ooh, and it's like, I can't really call it rock, but it's like sci-fi and synthetics sort of taking the shape of metal or rock, Judas Priest style guitar riffs, but the guitar is the only part, that's really part of that. It's the rest of it is electronic and synthetic sounds, and I think that's really interesting to me. I mean, that's what Metroid has pretty much always, the that kind of thing. Like the Phendrana Drift's Depths theme. It's like, it's sci-fi synths and electronic noises approximating into groove and funk and hip-hop and rock, and it's one of the things that gives Metroid Prime music this distinct feeling that it's not trying to be pretentious or grand epic, like like you'd see in a cinematic movie. It's suddenly it's hip hop, then all of a sudden it's like groovy funk, and then all of a sudden, but it's not actually those things. It's sci-fi and synthetic sounds approximating that sort of feeling, borrowing elements from it, but it's not actually becoming those things. Like, there are so many Metroid tracks where they're not just sci-fi ambience. It's like, no, this is funk. No, this has funk elements. No, this has rock elements. This is metal in it. This is like EDM. There's different things like that. And so I tried to sort of mimic that feeling in Flowers of God Nearby, where there are different sections that sort of take on, a hip-hop feeling, or a sort of broke beat, or they'll take on a rock and roll feeling, or something more frenetic. It'll take on elements of these different genres, but it's the sounds that I was working with approximating into that. So basically it's like having, which I did, that's how these kinds of compositions like Flowers of God Nearby come together. I have a basic set of sounds, and I have to use those for everything. So there is no, if I want to make a section that's like rock, I can't go pull out a whole new set of instruments for that. I have to use all my existing ones to try and break them into the mold of being rock and roll or hip hop. I have to find a way to tune the cheap little oboe MIDI synths that I have into acting like something else that isn't there, but I need something like it. So I have to kind of improvise the different parts of the track into different genres and noises and styles. And to me, that is probably one of the most exciting parts about it, is sort of trying to break and mold and bend the shapes into different sounds and styles, and seeing how much I can get just out of a single instrument. That's very exciting to me. But yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about with that. And next I wanted to talk about, which is the other day I tried to record part 2 of going through my old art, but I was completely out of it, utterly and completely. Like, I was slurring all over the place, just like, and then there would just be long stretches where my mind was just completely blank. Couldn't say a thing. I was exhausted. Couldn't say a single thing. Just stare, and then I'd realize that I've been sitting there for like a whole minute not doing anything, and it was recording. Or I would keep forgetting to hold the phone sideways as well. That was another thing that would keep happening. I would forget to hold the phone the right way, and it was just a whole mess. Just my tiredness completely dampened the enthusiasm that I did have. I couldn't express any of it. Just wasn't really able to do it. So I took a break, took a nap, worked on music, did all that, and then I'm going to come back to it. I'm going to come back to it soon. And I had another idea after that. And I realized, with this kind of channel, and with the money I make, and what I have, who needs a capture card who needs one to record some Nintendo Switch video games off the screen? I certainly don't. I have a phone, and my phone has a camera, and that camera can record for a good solid hour. So then I realized, hold on a sec. Even though I don't have a capture card to capture Nintendo Switch games, I can just stick my phone upwards and just set it to record the TV screen. I'm gonna do it DIY. So I'm thinking about, yeah, I could totally just make a video or do a journal or something where I'm just recording the game off the screen while also, talking through stuff at the same time. And how fun could that be? It would finally get me to play some darn video games. Which, if you'll remember, if you've heard any previous videos or seen any of them, cross-referencing with myself, I was talking about how I wanted to start playing video games again. It's been years since I actually properly sat down and played them. I rarely ever do. I love studying them. I love studying them. I love learning about them, different aspects of them. I love planning them. I love making, making the different part. I'm no programmer. I'm not a coder, but I love planning the mechanics. I love planning the game design. I love fitting all the pieces together. But then I rarely go and actually play them like I ought to. And I really mean it. I ought to. I want to. I want to play video games. And you know what? I'm going to give it a try after I record the next part of like looking through my old artwork. I'm going to give that a try. I really want to. But speaking of video games, I was talking about Resident Evil the other day, and I'm going to bring that up again. Resident Evil 9. It has really been intriguing me. A lot. I'll probably go into it more later, but it has really been keeping my attention. Now, there are parts of it that I think I'm not very fond of, or are a little weak, or, just something, but overall, in an overall sense, the whole thing is really catching my attention. I really like its build, the cut of its jib, its flow, and I'll discuss more about that. I don't even mind. I'll talk about this later, but I don't even mind the idea of making in this context, I don't mind the idea of making a scared character and not just letting the player experience it for themselves. I saw some people who complain, oh, it's cheap. They're creating a scaredy cat character who's scared in the game when you should just let the horror speak for itself. And it's like, you know what? There are a lot of situations where that is true. However, I don't think that would be helpful in this game. And I actually do think it is to its strength. The general characterization of Grace Ashcroft, I do think that there is a certain strength to that just having her never, just having a blank, silent protagonist, just, letting the player solely experience, that work. I like Metroid Prime a lot, and I would not want Samus talking or anything like that. And there are other experiences where it's like, I 100% agree. Let the player experience the atmosphere, the scare, the horror. If it's scary, let it scare them, that kind of thing. Don't try and use a scaredy cat character to manipulate the player or make them feel things, or, But I don't think that is the case with Resident Evil 9, and I'll talk about that later on. But, I think I'll go ahead and end this recording for now. That's mainly what I wanted to talk about for today. There's lots I want to say and talk about, but for today, I think that'll do.